After the divorce, she vanished silently, and shortly after, a carriage from a duke arrived. Outside, the gardens whispered with the hush of wind through ancient oaks, their gnarled branches swaying like silent sentinels. Lady Evelyn Hartwell walked the hallways with careful steps, her skirts brushing the polished floors, leaving no sound behind her. Tonight, the estate was unusually quiet. Even the servants, ever vigilant, seemed to feel the change in the air. Evelyn paused before the mirror in the drawing room. Her reflection was pale, framed by her dark hair cascading in waves over her shoulders. Her eyes, usually bright and alert, held a shadow of weariness and something more, a restless longing that she could not yet name. She touched the cold glass, tracing the outline of her own face, as if searching for the courage to see herself clearly. The divorce had been finalized only days ago. Her husband, Lord Roderick Hartwell, a man of stern features and sharp tongue, had cast her aside like an old garment. The announcement had sent ripples through the court, leaving whispers in its wake. She is free, yet alone, some said. Others wondered whether she would survive the social storm. Evelyn had smiled politely to each passing visitor, hiding the storm within. But behind closed doors, the weight of freedom pressed against her chest, heavy as a winter's frost. She knew she could not stay. Each room of the estate reminded her of the life she no longer belonged to. The grand dining hall where he had dismissed her with cold courtesy, the library where books had become instruments of silent judgment, and the corridors where even the shadows seemed to murmur his name. There was no space for her here, not really. And so she vanished silently, taking only what she could carry, a small chest of personal belongings, a silver locket that had belonged to her mother, and her heart, guarded yet trembling. Evelyn's escape was not hurried. She moved with care, leaving no trace, guided by the instinct that had taken root in her over the years. That life, once taken from her, could be reclaimed, not with defiance but with quiet, deliberate steps. The carriage in the stable had long been unused. She polished the wheels and harnessed the horses herself, the rhythm of her hands on leather and metal soothing her nerves. Outside, the moon rose, casting silver light over the gardens. For a brief moment, she paused, letting the scent of jasmine and wet earth fill her senses, committing the estate to memory as if she might never see it again. The road beyond the estate lay cloaked in fog, winding between forests that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Evelyn's carriage cut through the mist, its wheels crunching softly over the gravel, the horses' hooves striking a steady, echoing rhythm. She did not know where she was headed, only that she had to move, to leave behind the life that had grown cold and oppressive. In the shadows of the trees, the wind carried whispers, as if the forest itself were alive, watching her passage, curious or approving. She could not tell which. Days passed without incident, and the countryside seemed to welcome her in silence. Villagers watched the solitary carriage with wary eyes, murmuring tales of wandering noblewomen or restless spirits. Evelyn kept to the roads, avoiding towns and inns, trusting in her ability to remain unseen. Yet despite the physical solitude, her thoughts were loud. She thought of Roderick, of the empty promises, of the nights spent wondering why love could turn so bitter. And she thought of herself, of the fragile spark within that had survived cruelty, neglect, and disappointment. It was on the fourth night, as the carriage moved beneath a canopy of starlit sky, that she first sensed him, the presence before she saw the source. A subtle shift in the air, a coldness that did not belong to the night, made her grip the reins tighter. From the mist ahead, the shape of another carriage emerged. Its wheels seemed to absorb sound, its lanterns dim and flickering like dying stars. And then she saw the figure, tall, clad in a coat of deep velvet, his presence commanding without a word, his eyes catching the faint glow of moonlight and holding her gaze as though he had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. Duke Ashbourne. The name had reached her ears in passing, whispered among courtiers with awe and fear alike. He was a man known as much for his wealth and power as for the shadows that seemed to follow him, rumors of curses, of untamed secrets, of a heart hardened by loss and vengeance. Eveline's breath caught as he stepped from the carriage. There was no malice in his eyes, yet they were dark, deep pools in which one might drown if not careful. He offered no greeting, no pretense of civility. He merely watched, waiting for her reaction, as if he could see the threads of her life that she herself could not yet perceive. Eveline stopped the carriage a few paces from him. Her heart raced, not with fear alone, but with a strange, unexpected recognition, as though some ancient memory had stirred awake. She studied him carefully. Every movement he made was deliberate, yet effortless, controlled, yet filled with a quiet force that seemed to command the very mist around him. And then he spoke, his voice low, measured, yet carrying a weight that seemed to settle over the world. "You have come far," he said. But not far enough. Eveline's fingers tightened on the reins. She did not speak. Words felt small here, inadequate to the currents of tension that pulsed between them. The Duke stepped closer, and the mist swirled around his boots like smoke from an unseen fire. He lowered his eyes briefly, then raised them to meet hers once more. "There are things you do not yet understand," he continued. "Threats that linger beyond sight, and forces that seek to undo what freedom you have just claimed." Eveline felt a shiver, part fear, part curiosity. She had fled one prison, only to encounter a presence more imposing than any she had imagined. And yet, she did not feel powerless. Something in his gaze, in the way the air bent around him, told her that she might yet stand on her own, even here. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I have been waiting," he said simply, "and you were expected. It is time you understand that your path is not yours alone. Shadows are stirring, and they will not wait for hesitation." Eveline's mind raced. She had left everything behind to escape the life of duty and despair. And yet here, on a fog-shrouded road with a man whose very presence seemed to bend reality, she sensed that the past was not done with her. And perhaps, she thought with a faint, forbidden thrill, neither was her future. For a long moment the wind held its breath. The horses shifted, stamping softly on the road, the mist curling around the Duke and the carriage. Eveline studied him again, noting the faint scars along his hands, the subtle lines etched into his face, the way his eyes softened briefly as they passed over her. "You may come with me," he said finally, "or you may continue alone. But the choice is yours, though the road behind you is closed." Eveline hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of fear, longing, and curiosity. The world she had known had ended. The life she had fled still called to her with whispers of regret. And yet, in the face of this enigmatic Duke, she felt a strange stir of courage, of possibility. Slowly, she nodded. The reins of her carriage felt suddenly light in her hands, and yet heavy with the weight of decision. The Duke stepped aside, and she guided her horses forward, merging her path with his, her heart pounding in time with the rhythm of the wheels and hooves. As the two carriages moved together into the heart of the mist, Eveline could not shake the sensation that the shadows themselves were watching, that the night held its breath, that something ancient and unseen had taken note of this union. And in that suspended, trembling silence, she realized that her journey had only just begun. Somewhere in the fog, a whisper echoed, a promise of danger, of transformation, and perhaps of redemption. And for the first time in days, Eveline felt the stirrings of hope, dark yet brilliant, like moonlight on water. The carriage rolled onward, carrying its passenger and her unseen fears into a night that held both peril and possibility, toward a future neither fully understood, yet one that demanded courage, trust, and the faint, trembling pulse of desire. The fog hung thick over the winding road, swallowing the sound of hooves and the creak of wheels. Lady Eveline's eyes darted to the edge of the forest, where shadows seemed to move with a mind of their own, bending like living things. Every so often, she would glance at Duke Ashbourne, seated in his carriage ahead of hers, his figure outlined by the flickering lanterns. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight, as if the world itself paused to listen. After hours of silence, the Duke finally turned his gaze toward her. His eyes, dark as the forest depths, held an intensity that made her stomach twist in both unease and curiosity. "There is much you do not know," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to echo in the space between them. "Your departure was noticed." But not all watched with the eyes of malice. Some watched with care. Evelyn frowned. "Care? From whom? From strangers." Her grip on the reins tightened. "From those who understand the dangers that follow you," he replied. "You are not free, Evelyn, not yet. There are forces in this kingdom that seek to bind, to control, to undo what you have fought so hard to reclaim." She stared at him, heart pounding. "I am only myself. I seek nothing more than peace." Ashbourne's lips curved faintly, not in a smile, but in recognition of her bravery. "Peace is not always given, only earned, and sometimes it requires a companion who is willing to face the shadows with you." The carriage rolled through the forest, the air growing colder with each passing hour. Evelyn could sense the forest watching, as if the trees themselves leaned closer to hear their conversation. She thought of her ex-husband, Lord Roderick, and the bitterness that had defined their marriage. She had left him, yes, but she had not escaped the chains of fear he had cast in her heart. Now, she wondered, could the Duke be friend or danger? As if reading her thoughts, Ashbourne finally spoke again. "You fear the past. That is natural, but fear can also be a guide if you allow it to teach rather than paralyze." Evelyn drew a shaky breath. "And why do you care?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the road ahead, the mist curling around the carriage like silver smoke. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and deliberate. "Because, Evelyn, the curse upon you is real. It has followed you since before your marriage ended. Some call it vengeance, some call it fate. I call it something that must be faced, or it will consume everything you hold dear." A shiver ran down her spine. A curse. She had heard whispers of magic in the court, rumors of dark dealings and old grudges, yet never had she imagined it would touch her life. Ashbourne's eyes softened briefly as he observed her reaction. "You are strong," he said quietly, "stronger than you know. And yet, even the strongest need allies." Evelyn felt the weight of his gaze settle upon her like a mantle. There was something in it, an acknowledgment of her courage, a recognition of her pain, and an unspoken promise that he would not let her face the darkness alone. And though she did not fully trust him, a small part of her longed to believe that he could be a protector, not merely a shadow she feared. The carriage slowed as they reached a clearing, where the moonlight filtered through the trees, casting silver patterns on the ground. Ashbourne stopped and stepped out, motioning for her to follow. Evelyn hesitated, then climbed down, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. "You must see for yourself," he said, leading her to the edge of the clearing. There, half buried in the moss and roots, was a small relic, an obsidian amulet, black as midnight, pulsing faintly with a glow that seemed alive. "This is what pursues you. It marks those who have wronged and those who have been wronged. It does not distinguish between innocence and guilt." Evelyn stepped closer, drawn despite the chill running through her body. The amulet's glow seemed to reach into her mind, stirring memories she had tried to bury. The cold words, the harsh glances, the nights of loneliness and fear. She wanted to turn away, to retreat into the safety of ignorance. And yet the Duke's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, steadying, grounding. "You cannot ignore it," he said softly, "and running will only allow it to follow. You have a choice, face it with me or face it alone." Her chest tightened. The offer, though simple in words, carried immense weight. To accept meant stepping into a world of uncertainty, of danger, of strange and powerful forces. To refuse meant returning to isolation, where fear might claim her again. And in that moment, she realized that she no longer wanted to be alone, not while the shadows of the past lingered, not while this stranger, enigmatic and commanding, offered something she had longed for but never dared to seek: trust, protection, and perhaps a chance to reclaim herself. "I will come with you," she said finally, her voice firm. The words felt like a bridge across a chasm she had once feared she could never cross. Ashbourne's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes softened, just enough to reveal a flicker of something human beneath the austere exterior. "Good. Then we begin." They returned to the carriages, and Ashbourne guided her through paths known only to him, deeper into the forest where the light of the moon rarely touched the ground. The trees leaned closer, their branches like ancient guardians, their whispers soft yet urgent. Eveline noticed that the air here was different, charged, almost alive. It pressed against her skin and hair, and she felt a thrill of both fear and anticipation. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch or the distant cry of a night bird. Eveline's mind raced with questions. Who had cursed her? Why? And why did this duke, so distant, so imposing, care enough to intervene? At last they reached a clearing where a stone bridge arched over a dark river. On the far side, the castle rose from the ground like a mountain of shadow and light, its towers reaching toward the stars. The walls glimmered faintly, reflecting the glow of lanterns hidden in alcoves. Eveline felt both awe and fear, the kind that comes when one stands on the threshold of something immense, something unknown. "This is where we begin," Ashbourne said, his voice echoing slightly in the night air. "Inside these walls, you will learn to face what pursues you. There will be trials, and there will be moments of darkness, but there will also be moments of truth, moments where you will see yourself as you truly are." Eveline followed him across the bridge, each step bringing her closer to a destiny she did not fully understand. The castle gates opened silently before them, as if recognizing her presence, welcoming her into the shadows. Inside, the halls were dim, lit by flickering torches that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. The air smelled faintly of incense and old wood. Somewhere in the distance, water trickled, echoing like a secret melody through the vast chambers. Ashbourne led her to a room at the highest tower, where the windows overlooked the forest below. The room was simple yet elegant, furnished with dark wood, soft rugs, and a small fireplace. "This will be your sanctuary," he said. "As long as you remain here, you are under my protection. But you must understand, safety is not guaranteed beyond these walls. The curse waits, even now." Eveline sat near the window, looking out over the forest, the river, and the shadowed land beyond. She felt a mixture of relief and apprehension, the warmth of the fire against her skin contrasting with the cold knowledge that danger still lurked. Yet for the first time in many nights she felt a fragile sense of hope, a spark that whispered of possibility, courage, and perhaps even redemption. Ashbourne watched her silently, then spoke again, softer this time. "Do not mistake me for a savior. I am merely someone who has faced the darkness before and understands its ways. If you survive, you will not be alone, but you must face it willingly." Eveline nodded. The weight of her decision pressed against her heart, but she felt a growing strength within her, a resilience that had been tempered by pain, loss, and survival. She realized that her journey had only just begun, and that the Duke, enigmatic as he was, might be both her guide and her mirror. Night deepened, wrapping the castle in a cloak of shadow. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint hint of danger, the promise of change, and the echo of secrets yet to be revealed. Eveline lay awake, listening to the rhythm of the world around her, feeling the pulse of the curse that shadowed her, and sensing the quiet, unspoken bond forming between her and the Duke. Somewhere in the darkness, a spark of hope flickered, a fragile, trembling light that promised that even in the midst of fear and uncertainty, Courage and trust might yet prevail. And for the first time since her escape, Evelyn felt that she had chosen a path worth walking, no matter how shadowed, no matter how uncertain. The castle of Duke Ashbourne rose like a dark sentinel over the forest, its towers cutting sharp lines against the night sky. Inside, the corridors seemed endless, lit by torches that flickered with a soft golden glow, casting shadows that danced across the stone walls. Lady Evelyn walked beside the Duke, each step echoing in the silent halls, as though the building itself were aware of their presence. "It is not safe to linger in the halls after dusk," Ashbourne said quietly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to carry through the stone. "The curse grows stronger in the dark, feeding on doubt and fear, and it knows you are here." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the cloak around her shoulders. "I thought I could escape it, leave everything behind, but it seems that even in a new place it follows." Ashbourne's eyes softened, though he did not touch her. "You cannot outrun what is bound to you, but you can face it, and in facing it you may find freedom." They reached the inner courtyard, a large open space surrounded by the castle's towers. Moonlight spilled over the cobblestones, illuminating the fountains and statues that seemed frozen in a dance of time. In the center of the courtyard, a circle of faintly glowing symbols had been etched into the stone, and Evelyn felt a shiver as she stepped closer. The air around it was heavy, almost alive. "This is where you will begin," Ashbourne said. "Here the past and present meet. The curse will test you, not just your strength, but your mind, your heart, your choices. You must learn to trust yourself and me." Evelyn studied the symbols. They pulsed faintly, as if waiting for something or someone. Her pulse quickened. She had always believed herself to be cautious, practical, careful. Yet here, in the stillness of the night, she felt a pull she could not explain, a desire to step forward, to confront the darkness that had followed her for so long. Ashbourne watched her carefully. "The first step is always the hardest," he said. "You cannot run from fear, Evelyn. You must walk into it." Taking a deep breath, Evelyn stepped into the center of the circle. The symbols glowed brighter as she did, casting the courtyard in an ethereal light. She felt a strange sensation, as if the air itself pressed against her skin, cold yet electric. Shadows seemed to move at the edges of her vision, forming shapes that flickered and vanished. She closed her eyes, focusing on her heartbeat, and tried to steady the rising tide of panic. "You are not alone," Ashbourne murmured. His presence behind her was steady, anchoring her as the shadows swirled around her. "Face it, name the fear, see it, and it will lose power." Evelyn opened her eyes and saw the first vision, a memory she had tried to forget. Her ex-husband, Lord Roderick, standing in the hall of her former estate, his voice sharp and cruel. He had belittled her, dismissed her thoughts, erased her presence with a single glance. The memory made her chest ache, a reminder of the loneliness and betrayal that had driven her away. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to turn away. "I see you," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "I see the pain you caused me, and I will not let it control me anymore." The shadows writhed, shifting into another form, this time an image of herself, smaller, uncertain, afraid. Evelyn took a step forward, reaching out to the reflection. "I am stronger now," she said. "I will not be the same as I was. I am not afraid." The light of the symbols dimmed, the shadows receding slightly, and Evelyn felt a spark of relief, though she knew this was only the beginning. Ashbourne stepped closer, his gaze intent and unyielding. "Good, that is the first step. But the curse does not yield easily. You will be tested again." Over the next days, Evelyn faced visions that twisted the past and present, each one forcing her to confront memories she had buried deep. Scenes of her childhood, moments of failure, times she had doubted herself, all came alive in the castle's shadowed halls. The Duke guided her with quiet patience, never forcing her but always present, a steady anchor in the storm of images. It was during one of these nights that Evelyn noticed a change in him. Ashbourne, who had always seemed so composed, began to show glimpses of vulnerability. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched briefly before he caught himself. Once late at night, she saw him staring at the moonlit forest, his eyes distant, and realized that he too carried shadows from the past. "You have burdens," she said softly one evening, breaking a silence that had stretched for hours. "You do not need to hide them from me." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Burden is part of life, Evelyn. Some of us are given more than we can bear alone. I have learned to live with it, but it does not mean I have forgiven myself." Her heart ached at the admission. She understood now that the Duke's sternness, his control, and his shadows were not merely power. They were armor, forged from loss and regret. And as much as she had feared him at first, she began to see the man beneath. A man who had suffered, who had loved and lost, who had known darkness and endured. The bond between them grew, unspoken but undeniable. In quiet moments by the fire, in walks along the battlements, in the shared silence of the castle halls, Evelyn felt her fear transform into trust. And with that trust came a new awareness, a flicker of something dangerous yet irresistible. She began to see the Duke not just as a protector, but as someone whose presence made her heart beat faster, whose words lingered in her mind long after they were spoken. One night, the visions grew more intense. Evelyn found herself standing in a forest that was both real and unreal, shadows twisting into grotesque shapes, whispering threats and lies. At the center of the forest stood her ex-husband, his face twisted with rage and jealousy. He reached toward her, the air around him thick with power she could not name. Evelyn's breath caught. She wanted to flee, to escape the memory that seemed alive before her. But Ashbourne's voice rang in her mind, steady and firm. "Do not run. You are stronger than this. Face it." She drew a deep breath, stepping toward the vision. "You cannot control me anymore," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I am not afraid." The shadows writhed violently, then shattered like glass. The vision of her ex-husband vanished, leaving only the quiet, silver-lit forest. Evelyn fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Ashbourne stepped beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You are learning," he said softly. "And in learning, you grow stronger than even I expected." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. No curses, no shadows, no past mistakes, just the quiet, undeniable presence of someone who understood her in ways she had never imagined. But even in that moment of closeness, the shadows whispered warnings. The curse was not yet broken, and Evelyn knew that their trials were far from over. There would be more visions, more challenges, and perhaps more revelations of both her own strength and the Duke's hidden vulnerabilities. The next morning, Evelyn awoke to find the Duke gone from the room. She followed the sound of his footsteps to the library, where he stood before a table covered in old tomes and scrolls. His expression was grim, focused, as he traced his fingers over the pages, reading words that seemed to shimmer with a strange, otherworldly light. "You have faced the first trials well," he said without looking up. "But there is more to come. The curse is tied to both your past and mine in ways you cannot yet see. To break it, we must uncover its origin." Evelyn stepped closer. "Origin? You mean someone placed it?" He nodded, finally meeting her gaze. "Long ago in this kingdom, those with power, both political and magical, sometimes left marks on others. Marks that lingered, passed down, or awakened when the time was right. Your freedom, your strength, it has awakened what was hidden." She shivered, realizing that the danger was not just a memory, not just her ex-husband's bitterness, but something far older, far deeper. Yet, alongside the fear was a strange exhilaration, a sense that she was no longer simply a victim, but an active participant in her own fate. The Duke closed one of the tomes, turning to her with a rare softness in his eyes. "You are ready for the next step," he said, "but it will demand trust, courage, and perhaps surrender." Evelyn swallowed hard. She did not know what surrender would mean in this context, yet she felt a deep, undeniable pull toward him, toward the unknown trials, and toward the promise of redemption that lay beyond fear. The forest outside stirred in the morning wind, leaves whispering secrets, shadows flickering like memories. Evelyn looked out the window, feeling the pulse of power and mystery that surrounded the castle, the Duke, and herself. For the first time, she realized that fear and longing could coexist, that strength and vulnerability could mingle, and that the path forward, though perilous, was hers to walk. And somewhere in the quiet, shadowed halls, the Duke watched her, knowing that the trials ahead would test them both, but also knowing that together they could face the darkness and perhaps find light where none had existed before. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when Lady Evelyn Hartwell stood at the edge of the castle's tallest tower. The wind swept through her hair, carrying with it the scent of pine, earth, and something more elusive, something ancient, almost alive. She had spent days in preparation, guided by Duke Ashbourne, confronting visions, fears, and memories that sought to bind her. Yet today she would face the greatest challenge, the heart of the curse itself. Ashbourne appeared beside her without a sound, his dark cloak catching the wind like a shadow in motion. His expression was calm, but his eyes revealed the storm beneath, an intensity Evelyn had come to recognize as both a warning and a promise. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, carrying the weight of the trials that had brought them here. Evelyn drew a deep breath, feeling the pull of the curse thrumming through the air as if the castle itself waited for her answer. "I am," she said, her voice firm, yet tinged with the tremor of nerves. "I will not run, not now, not ever again." Ashbourne nodded. "Good. Remember, the curse feeds on fear, on doubt, and on anger. Face it with clarity, with courage, and with trust, not just in yourself, but in those who stand with you." Together, they descended into the heart of the castle, the ancient halls that had long been sealed. Torches flickered along the walls, casting shadows that seemed alive. The air grew colder with each step, carrying whispers that tickled the edges of their minds. Whispers of betrayal, of pain, of failures long past. Evelyn's hand found Ashbourne's, a gesture of connection that steadied her. "We face it together," she said. "Yes," he replied, "always together." At the center of the hall lay a stone pedestal, and upon it rested a crystal orb, glowing faintly with a light that seemed both warm and chilling at once. Evelyn could feel the pulse of energy emanating from it, the curse's heart, its very essence. Shadows danced around the orb, writhing like smoke, forming shapes of faces she recognized, scenes she had feared to remember, and threats she had never imagined. Ashbourne stepped beside her. "Do not be afraid. The power within is not invincible. It is fueled by the echoes of the past, by fear, and by unresolved pain. If we face it together, it will falter." Evelyn approached the orb, her steps deliberate. As she reached out, visions surged through her mind. Lord Roderick's anger, the court's whispers, her own doubts, her own insecurities. Every memory of betrayal and every pang of fear surged like waves, threatening to pull her under. Yet as her fingers brushed the orb, she felt Ashbourne's presence beside her, firm and grounding. "You are stronger than this," he said, his hand brushing hers. The contact sent a surge of courage through her. "Trust yourself, trust me, trust what you have become." Evelyn inhaled deeply, closing her eyes. She did not try to fight the visions, she faced them, naming each fear, each regret, each shadow within herself. "I am not afraid," she whispered. "I am not the same as I was. I am strong, I am free, and I choose my path." The orb pulsed violently, the shadows twisting in resistance, but Evelyn held firm. Ashbourne mirrored her stance, his energy intertwining with hers, steadying and amplifying her courage. The light from the orb grew blinding, and for a moment it seemed as though the shadows themselves would overwhelm them. Then, slowly, the darkness began to dissolve, melting into streams of silvery light that swirled around the chamber before fading into nothingness. The curse had been broken, not destroyed, but transformed. Its power no longer had hold over Evelyn, and she felt a weight lift from her chest, a freedom she had never imagined possible. Evelyn sank to her knees, exhausted yet triumphant. Ashbourne knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, his dark eyes soft with relief and pride. "You have done it," he said. "You faced yourself, your fears, and the shadows that sought to bind you. You have earned your freedom." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, not of sorrow, but of release, of triumph, of the realization that she had reclaimed not only her life, but her soul. We did it together," she whispered. "Yes," Ashbourne agreed. "Together." They remained there for a long moment, the silence between them heavy with unspoken emotion. The bond that had grown through trials, through visions, through shared fear and courage, now glimmered in the quiet, a connection deeper than either had expected. As dawn's first light touched the castle walls, Evelyn rose to her feet, looking out over the forest below. The world seemed changed, lighter, freer, as if the night itself had been cleansed. And yet the memory of shadows lingered, a reminder of what she had faced and of the courage it had demanded. Ashbourne stepped beside her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "The curse is broken, but the world remains as it always was, full of challenges, full of uncertainty. But you have learned that you can face it. That is what makes you extraordinary." Evelyn turned to him, feeling a surge of emotion she could no longer contain. "And what of you?" she asked softly. "You have carried your own shadows all this time. Will you finally let them go?" He met her gaze, and for the first time the sternness that had always defined him softened entirely. "I have carried them for too long," he admitted. "But you have shown me that it is possible to face the past, to forgive, and to move forward. I will try, Evelyn, with you." A quiet understanding passed between them, unspoken yet complete. Both had been shaped by pain, by fear, by shadows that threatened to consume them. Yet in facing those trials together, they had found strength, trust, and perhaps even love, something neither had dared to name until now. The castle's halls, once heavy with darkness and whispers, now felt alive with possibility. The torches flickered in the morning breeze, casting warm light over stone walls that had witnessed centuries of history. The wind carried with it the scent of new beginnings, of redemption, and of choices made with courage and heart. As they descended from the tower, Evelyn felt a sense of clarity she had never known. The past could not be erased, but it could be acknowledged, faced, and released. And as she walked beside Ashbourne through the castle's halls, she realized that they were no longer merely individuals seeking safety. They were companions, allies, and something more, bound by the trials they had endured and the trust they had earned. They reached the castle courtyard, where the first light of day touched the fountains and statues, casting long, soft shadows. Evelyn paused, looking out over the forest, and then turned to Ashbourne. "The world is vast, full of unknowns, but I do not fear it anymore. Not when we face it together." Ashbourne's gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. "And I will be by your side no matter what comes. The shadows may return, but together we are stronger than any darkness." The forest beyond the castle stirred in the morning wind, leaves rustling like whispers of approval, and the distant mountains caught the light of the rising sun. Evelyn and Ashbourne stood side by side, their hands brushing, their hearts aligned, knowing that the trials had changed them, not only freeing them from curses but awakening a bond that neither had expected. Days passed, and life within the castle returned to a quiet rhythm. Evelyn explored the halls, discovered hidden libraries, and walked the battlements with Ashbourne, learning of his past, his victories, and his losses. Each story revealed a man shaped by shadow, yet tempered by courage and honor. And in turn, Ashbourne learned of Evelyn's resilience, her intelligence, and her compassion, qualities that had survived betrayal and loss and now shone brighter than ever. One evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the castle in gold and amber light, Evelyn and Ashbourne stood together on the highest tower. The air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the gardens below. They had faced darkness, confronted fear, and emerged stronger, not just as individuals but together. Evelyn turned to Ashbourne, her voice soft but certain. "We have faced the shadows. We have survived. And now we choose our own path." Ashbourne smiled faintly, the first full smile she had seen from him. "Yes, our path is ours to walk, together or apart, but I hope it is together." She reached for his hand, holding it firmly, feeling the steady pulse of his strength alongside her own. "Together," she said. And as the night settled over the forest, the castle, and the land beyond, Evelyn and Ashbourne stood side by side, not as the haunted figures who had once been bound by curses and fear, but as two souls transformed, redeemed, free, and ready to face whatever the world would bring. The wind whispered around them, soft and approving, carrying a promise that the past was behind them and that the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. Together they would face it, and in that union they found a light that no darkness could touch. And for the first time in a long while, Lady Evelyn Hartwell allowed herself to hope, not for escape, not for freedom alone, but for life, for trust, for love, and for the promise of new beginnings. The shadows had passed and the dawn had come.